Okay, good. So I'm going to talk about, I guess, the time the USS Constitution ran into the Long Beach earthquake in 1933. Um, and anybody who's interested, I have maybe a little more in the talk than I probably should. So if I move through it a little quickly and get through on time, I don't know if the default for your group is to put this online, but I'm happy to make it accessible, um, however that might work. But right now I've got it on my Google Drive, and I can make that available to anyone. Okay, so let's see here. All right, so kind of here's an outline for the presentation. I can't resist kind of throwing in some stuff about earthquakes, since in a way that's more my background than the naval part. Uh, Flatly, I've got some of that. But anyway, I'm going to try to get through all these topics. I want to make it clear from the outset that I was never in the Navy. I haven't been to too many of the meetings, but I've been really impressed by the knowledge that lots of people seem to have about the Navy and ships and naval covers. And in a way, that's not my specialty, but it turns out that my interest in earthquake and philatelic collections around them intersected with the Constitution and its national tour. And so I'm happy to get any feedback, any help from people that see mistakes or things that they might want to add on to what I have to say. I did make it to Charleston Navy Yard a couple summers ago and did the tourist thing there. And so I was glad that I got that under my belt before I put this presentation together. So just a little bit of personal history here, since I'm really not acquainted with many people in the group. Um, like like most people, I suppose I started off with childhood collection. I had relatives in Europe, and through my mother's workplace that helped me get going. But I grew up in the 50s, when, especially after the launch of Sputnik during the International Geophysical Year, there was a lot of interest in science and science education. And so I had an interest in science, and I went on to study engineering and then geophysics in graduate school. And I taught geophysics and geology at Franklin and Marshall College for 33 years. My specialties were actually in the Earth's magnetic field and applications to archaeology, but I was responsible for our departmental seismograph. It is now digital, but we have the old drum recorder shown there. And when I decided about 20 years ago I wanted to start collecting something, it ended up being stamps and other philatelic objects about the International Geophysical Year. Uh, but then I added on a second theme a few years ago, which became North American, mostly United States earthquakes. So that's part of that is what I'm going to talk about today. Um, There are no United States stamps, postage stamps on earthquakes because of the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee's policy not to portray anything that they consider as negative. So that includes national disasters. There are no U.S. stamps that I know of on natural disasters. Um, I do have some stamps from Latin American and Caribbean countries on earthquakes, although I won't show those here today. My collection has about 500 different items, including some stamps, postcards, postal cards, um, some covers, and some miscellaneous things. So I'll show a handful of those today that are related to the 1933 earthquake and the Constitution's run-in with that. I do have a spreadsheet with all my items on it, and I'm happy to share that. That also links to the scans of all the items, which I have in a Flickr album. So if anybody's interested enough, I can provide that information. There have been a couple of Cinderella stamps in the U.S. related to earthquakes, and so I show a couple of those on the screen here. Um, so these are the earthquakes for which I have the most items in my earthquake collection. So, San Francisco 1906 earthquake, I have the most items. I guess that was in a time of pretty intensive postcard sending. Uh, and for the Hebgen Lake earthquake, I decided to collect a lot of just image cards that don't always have text. My preference is for postcards and occasional letters. I like to get things that were sent near the time of the earthquake, soon after the earthquake, with an image of the earthquake and preferably some text about it. I didn't always get all of that, but I try for it. The Long Beach earthquake, which I'll talk about today, is the third biggest part of my collection. I have 44 items from that. I also have separate items that I call my Old Ironsides collection because I started collecting a little bit of more generic Constitution postcards and covers, although they're not all particularly related to the earthquake itself. There is some literature on these topics, of course, and not too long ago in the American Philatelist, there was a nice piece by Ray Burby that was about collecting natural disasters in general, including earthquakes. I don't think it was his list, but I think the editors put together a list of some other articles about earthquakes on stamps, but there's not too much on that particular topic that's out there. So here's the outline, and I'll try to kind of step us through this. And like I said, you've got to sit through some little bit of seismology to get to the philately. Uh, so uh, First, let's start with an image of where do earthquakes happen around the world. And this pattern has been known for a long time, although it wasn't understood until the 1960s why earthquakes seem to happen non-randomly around the Earth. They're concentrated in distinct belts. And you've probably heard of the Ring of Fire, especially if you read National Geographic, as you were talking about before. So just like volcanoes, there's a high concentration of earthquakes around the rim of the Pacific Ocean and through other different belts on the Earth's surface. Uh, won't go into it for time, but there's also patterning in the depths of these earthquakes. You only get deep earthquakes, the intense colors, in even more restricted areas around the Earth's surface. So, as you might know, the theory that now explains this is the theory of plate tectonics. This didn't crystallize until the late 1960s or so. And so we now believe there are these plates that move around the Earth's surface relative to each other. And the plates interact in different ways. There's a process called subduction where some plates dive beneath other plates, uh, places where plates spread apart, places where plates slide by each other. And at any types of these three boundaries, earthquakes will occur. So we have, for instance, the spreading boundary in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. We have the sliding motion at the San Andreas Fault, which is important for today's presentation. And we have places where plates subduct, which we do get in part of my North American collection in the area of the Caribbean. So if you would compare these plate boundaries with the last image, you'd see that where you get the high concentrations of these earthquakes correspond to plate boundaries. Not 100% of the earthquakes occur at plate boundaries, but a large percentage of them do. So if we zoom in on North America a little bit, this is a figure that I generated myself from a database of earthquakes provided by the U.S. Geological Survey. So for the West Coast and down here, I'm showing all earthquakes that are greater than magnitude 7 from 1900 to the present. So those are concentrated at plate boundaries. Here's Juan de Fuca here, this small plate off the northwest coast. The Long Beach earthquake, which we'll talk about today, is in here. So there are earthquakes in the interior of the United States, but they're not as big. So for the inset here, I'm showing for the same time period earthquakes that have magnitudes greater than 5. So we get quite a few, but just not as many big ones in the interior of the United States. But you can see the same delineation of the plate boundaries here that you could see on the global map a couple slides ago. And there's several plates that are involved here: North American plate, Pacific plate, the small Juan de Fuca plate, the smaller Cocos plate, and the Caribbean plate here. So let's look at a little bit of basic philatelity on the U.S. Constitution. I'm assuming many, if not all of you, are familiar with this, but I've put a few of the basic stamps and related covers that are not related to the earthquake itself. So we have the stamp here, issued in 1947, and of course a related cachet on this to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the first successful launch in 1797. I try to put some of the relevant information on all of these scans, including my own catalog number that I use for my collection. Then in 2012, we got another stamp, which was on the 200th anniversary of the War of 1812. I'm not sure exactly why the date of issue was August 18th, because as far as I could see, the battle itself was on the 19th, but close enough. And then another thing that sort of mystifies me as a somewhat beginner in this area is that the Constitution shows up on 3 different items of postal stationery. And I've been getting some help from a few people in the group through the Facebook group. So just today, I learned that Cal Sachs, who signed this particular cover, was the stamp designer. So John Havis provided me with that information. And so I've got these as part of my collection, even though they're not related to the earthquake itself. So then we go on to the national tour, the 3-year tour that took place from 1931 to 1934. Again, I had some help here from Dennis O, and I was actually looking for a map of the tour, and I couldn't find one. There must be one out there someplace, I think, and maybe in some newspaper articles that I haven't really looked into yet. But anyway, he gave me a link to this. I guess it's some kind of a wooden relief map, and they're not very big, but hopefully you can see the ports on the map where the Constitution visited during this 3-year expedition. So this was the Goodwill Tour after the ship was rebuilt, including help from school children and donating coins to raise the money. It's interesting to think about the thing I just learned about a couple of years ago, the philosophical problem called the ship of Theseus, because if 85% of the boat was rebuilt, is it still a Constitution or not? So I'll leave that to the philosophers to decide. But anyway, when the tour occurred, there were 90 stops, 76 different U.S. ports, and some of the statistics and about that journey. And I guess the USCS, as I understood it, formed kind of around this tour so that people could collect covers that were provided by the ship as it traveled on its tour. So one resource that's been helpful to me as I put this talk together, I also got this through the Facebook group. So Philip Parker did this book about the national tour, which I hadn't previously come across. And he himself, through the Facebook group, recommended I have a look at it. So it was pretty informative. It's a Kindle book, not expensive at all, and not too long to read, which is important for my reading habits these days. So you can get this on Amazon if you're interested. You can find online a list of all the ports that the Constitution visited, and it was in Long Beach twice, once on its way up the West Coast, and then again returned to that several months later. But it was in Long Beach from March 10th, 1933, up until March 19th. So March 10th was the date of the earthquake. And so it just arrived the day of the quake in the morning, and the quake happened about 5 p.m. So uh, kind of a lucky or unlucky encounter of the Constitution meeting up with the earthquake itself. Um, Two of the photos here I actually took out of Parker's book, and this one from a placed on online source, just to give a photo of the Constitution and its tender, the Grebe. Louis Gulliver, was the commander of the voyage, and Harry Moore was a postal clerk who apparently canceled 4 million covers uh, during the trip, and actually happened to be, according to Parker, his Parker's great uncle. So that was an interesting coincidence. So we have him to thank for some of the items that I'll be showing today. So I have a few covers to show that were part of the national tour, but not really related to the earthquake. I assume you could tell me, but I assume there must be people that just, collect covers from as many ports of call as they can. And I've just got a few that I thought were interesting for different reasons, but not very complete coverage. So the one on the left, front and back. It's postmarked in Washington, D.C., when the Constitution was there fairly early on. And the date is the last day for the 2 cent postage rate before it went up to 3 cents. Uh, so it was actually in Washington, D.C. for a number of months, kind of waiting out, I guess, part of the winter or the early winter before it kind of moved south from there. And the cachet on the back is not too too impressive, but there's an image of Old Ironsides on that. Um, this was actually a postcard, and the picture on the front of the postcard was from Yorktown, Virginia. So that was one of the places that she stopped on the voyage, and she was there for a week in 1931. Um, and That coincided with the 150th anniversary of Cornwall's surrender. So that's actually the date of the cancellation on the side of the postcard. And there's a cachet of the Constitution. Uh, I guess this is kind of a cachet that relates to being in San Pedro sometime later. So that's actually where the cancellation is from. So presumably somebody toted this uh, postcard from Yorktown until it got to San Pedro, and then posted it after that. San Pedro, I guess I didn't know this, might be common knowledge, but this is actually right in or outside of Los Angeles, and it was the last port that the Constitution stopped at before it moved on to the Long Beach port right afterwards. So it was in San Pedro for about 3 weeks. That actually incorporated the date of FDR's first inauguration and the Pacific Fleet Review, which is kind of mentioned on the cachet here. So the date on this is March 9th. That's one day before the Long Beach earthquake. So Constitution was ready to shove off for Long Beach, where it would meet that earthquake. And three more covers here. This one was, I guess, on the way back through the Panama Canal. Uh, and there's actually a Cinderella stamp here, blown up a little bit here on Old Ironsides. Um, the HM here, I assume, is Mr. Harry Moore, uh, but you can let me know if that's perhaps not true. Um, and then I have two covers here for when she returned to Boston. So this one is postmarked May 7th, this one May 8th. And so that's when she got back to Boston, where she spent most of the time ever since then. Okay, so let's go back and look at the earthquake itself a little bit more. This was now on March 10th, 1933. So here's some of the characteristics of the earthquake. It happened almost 6 p.m. Local time, uh, fairly shallow, kind of a medium magnitude. You know, the largest earthquakes are maybe magnitude 9. So this isn't enormous as earthquakes go, but happening kind of right by a metropolitan area led to a modest amount of damage. So with earthquakes, there's two different types of scales. One is the magnitude scale, which is an expression of how much energy is released by the earthquake. But there's another scale called the intensity scale. The magnitude scale is technically open-ended, but the largest ones we've ever had have been 9 or maybe a little bit higher. That would include the 1964 Alaskan earthquake and the 1960 Chile earthquake. Uh, it's a logarithmic scale, so every increase by 1 magnitude is a 30 times increase in the energy released. So this is pretty modest compared to a magnitude 9 earthquake. The intensity, which is Roman numerals 1 through 12, is an indication of the amount of damage that an earthquake does. So again, as an 8, Roman numeral 8, this is sort of modest as they go. Uh, but I have the general map here to show where the epicenter of the earthquake was. The epicenter on this map, a little more detail, it's actually a little bit to the south of Long Beach, but I've circled in red here actually 4 different ports where the U.S. Constitution visited. San Pedro is right before Long Beach, and then from there it went on to Venice, Santa Monica, and further up the coast. So most of the damage was done kind of in the area of Long Beach and the area south of Los Angeles, like Watts and Compton. Uh, some damage in Los Angeles as well, but the most intense damage was done in this area here. Lots of the monetary damage, the number of fatalities are given here. Lots of buildings were hit, and particularly lots of schools were damaged. And so as a result of the earthquake and the damage to the public buildings, the legislature fairly quickly uh, passed what's called the Field Act, which required better engineering, better construction for public schools in California. So this earthquake was actually quite important in helping California develop better building codes to protect against damage in the future. Before this earthquake, I guess there was the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, uh, and 1925 Santa Barbara earthquake. So we're in the centennial year of that. So there was really a dawning consciousness of the earthquake hazard, but this one really prompted a little more action in terms of better building codes for public buildings and private buildings as well. So here, for the 3 years encompassing the tour, I've plotted all magnitude 6 earthquakes in the United States. And so not so many. Um, Really only 2 of them occurred in places where the Constitution might have encountered one of these. So here's the Long Beach earthquake where it did. And it didn't really stop in Eureka, Northern California. It stopped in San Francisco and then on up further the coast from there. But this was another coastal earthquake. All these are a little further inland. But this was the one that we're talking about. So it was kind of a quite a coincidence that for the 1 week that it was stopped in Long Beach, it ran into this particular earthquake. And here I've sort of superimposed the map showing the earthquake locations with the one from before showing the different ports of call. And so you can see this group of stops here. One of those is Long Beach, and there's the earthquake right there. Just a couple of quotes here. It's not really, I don't think, worth reading all of through all these, but this is a quote from Parker's book from Commander Gulliver, and he did hear and feel uh, the earthquake and was worried there was more damage to the ship, but it was really very minimal. I've only myself felt two earthquakes in my life. One of them occurred here, actually in Lancaster, where we have occasional small ones. That one was about a magnitude 5, or I think it was 4.5, kind of in the southern part of the county, about 20 miles from where I live. And you can actually hear, especially in the eastern US, these booms when earthquake occurs. And it's pretty typical for people to think that a boiler exploded or there was a truck accident. Um, but for that earthquake that I experienced, there was very little damage done, but it was the same kind of exposure that Gulliver seemed to describe here. The other earthquake that I've personally felt was one that happened, when was that, about a dozen years ago in Virginia. And although we are a couple hundred miles from there, that one was bigger and could be felt uh, up here in Lancaster. But there wasn't really any damage, serious damage to the ship. I did come across an article that was published in Proceedings of the U.S. Naval Institute uh, about earthquakes in the Navy. And it sort of talks about why the Navy might be interested in knowing more about earthquakes. Um, and this was published in 1938. I actually didn't see anything in the article that referred to the Long Beach earthquake, but I'm kind of wondering if the incentive to write the article had something to do with the Long Beach earthquake just a few years before that. Okay, so I have a few covers that came off the ship at the time of the earthquake, and look at those first. And then I have a few more items that are not particularly related to Ironsides, but again, cover some aspects of the earthquake. So we'll see on these few covers I'm going to show the same cachet welcoming Old Ironsides to Long Beach, as you see here. And all of them also have on the back a back stamp. I guess these were first uh, canceled on board and then went into city post office to be stamped there and forwarded along. So we can see that the cancellation on board occurred in the PM, in the afternoon of March 10th, and then in Long Beach itself at 4 p.m. So if you recall, the earthquake happened just a few minutes before 6 p.m. So it sort of made it through the system and they got on their way, the mail got on their way before the earthquake occurred. Now, when I bought this a few years ago, I do all my buying pretty much on eBay. But when I got this, this little article was enclosed with the cover. And on the back side, it says that this little clipping was from the Weekly Philatelic Gossip, which was published from 1922 to 1961. So it mentions H.G. Trout, who was the secretary of the Long Beach Stamp Collectors Group. And so he has signed these next few covers. Uh, it also talked about the covers going out right before the earthquake, and how the backstamping in the city became impossible after the earthquake occurred because there was actually damage to the post office, which we'll see in one of the figure sets coming up. Two of the postal workers in town were actually killed as a result of the damage done to the earthquake. So this cover, it's a different one, looks quite similar to the last one. Um, uh, the addressee is different, but most of the other information is the same, but there were two clippings with this one as well. This one looks just by there's no identification of where the clippings came from, but just because of the similar type, I assume that this one is probably also from the Weekly Philatelic Gossip. And I just saw today that uh, the Weekly Philatelic Gossips from this era are all, somebody has scanned them and they're online. So maybe I'll see if I can kind of track this down. But at the moment, I'm not sure if it's from that magazine or not. This pretty much says the same thing as what the quote from Gulliver said, that damage was slight. There was a railing that was damaged, um, and some of the cannons moved around a little bit, but that was about it. And then this clipping again says pretty much the same thing. Not too much damage other than the cannon sliding around and the damage to the railing. So another one again with March 10th p.m. On the Constitution and March 10th, 4 p.m. in town. Um, Same cachet, different stamp. This one has a special marking on it though, March 10th, 33, Long Beach earthquake. Uh, so again, I guess maybe some of you would help me with some insight on this. I guess when did this actually get put on? Uh, Relative to the other events. I'm a little bit curious about that. And then one more, I guess, from the ship. Again, this was postmarked before the quake on the ship and before the quake in town, and made its on its way. Uh, this one was also sent special delivery, has a postage due stamp on it, and again, I have this marking, which I'm not sure I can, oops, that I completely understand it. So any help would be appreciated, but it says the fee claimed by the office of the first address. So I only saw see one address. I'm not sure what that means actually. And I guess those are the four covers that I have that were um, canceled on the ship before the earthquake, canceled in Sit Town, and then made it out into the mails before the earthquake occurred. I have a few others canceled on the ship that week, but I'm not showing those today. And so finally, just a sampling of some other covers, postcards, and ephemera. I recently bought a copy of the San Pedro newspaper uh, from dated on February 16th, 1933. This was actually the day before the Constitution arrived in San Pedro. So this is a fairly big supplement to the paper with different articles about the USS Constitution. So, at the ports, it was not unusual to get thousands of people a day visiting the ship, a lot of public interest. They tried to get a lot of school kids who had helped the funding of the reconstruction to visit. And so the newspapers took a lot of interest in in the tour as well. So Steve, I think, is in the audience, and so he provided me with a little help, but not actually directly, but one of his online posts helped me understand this cover a little bit. This was postmarked from the USS Pennsylvania on March 10th, the day of the earthquake, although at 7 p.m., which is only 1 hour after the earthquake occurred. And this was sent to Charles Olasky, and I guess we might assume that he sent it as well to himself. Steve's piece at this address uh, says, quote, that this was a different cover, but it was canceled by Olasky, who was known for researching and adding killer bar slogans. And in this case, the killer bar slogan is California earthquake. Again, just an hour after the earthquake actually occurred. So I thought that was pretty quick action. And he served on the USS Brooks. Then just a couple of other covers that I found interesting. This one was canceled on board on March 11th. And then this is the back, so it's incomplete uh, back stamp, but you can see the lost part. I assume that was Los Angeles. And one of the small clippings that I showed earlier talked about after the earthquake that the mail had to be sent on to Los Angeles to be further processed. And so just being a day later, and we'll see damage to the post office in a minute, I assume that's what happened to this cover. Um, so that to me was kind of interesting. And then this is a few days later, um, postmarked on March 16th. So this is 6 days after the earthquake from San Pedro, which is very close to Long Beach. And there's a marking on here above address within earthquake area. So again, here's I'm not sure why that's important for the cover. So I'd appreciate if anybody has any thoughts about that. Here are two anniversary covers. Um, the one on the left here is from a year later, postmarked March 10th. Hard to read, but it's 1934. And this is the first anniversary of the earthquake. This was included prepaid permit postage, and on the backside, there were two postage due stamps. Then we have a cover sent in 1940. So this is now the 7th anniversary of the earthquake. It's kind of hard to see the cachet here, but this is, I guess, shows the time of the earthquake, a few minutes before 6 o'clock. And damage to what is actually in the text indicated to be the Roosevelt School. So one of the many schools that was damaged by the quake. So I actually have a fair number of postcards, and I'm only going to show one um, just to give you a taste of this, but um, I have probably about 20 or so others. So these were back in the heyday of the real photo uh, postcards where there were cameras which could, um, the negatives could be used to develop the positive directly onto the back of postcards. So this one is Hamilton Junior High School. And this was postmarked on March 25th, 15 days after the earthquake, and sent to England. So this is actually my sort of favorite kind of item in general for my earthquake collecting. Since I do have a lot of postcards, I like ones that are sent soon after the earthquake, and 2 weeks is soon enough for me. from a place near the earthquake. So not Long Beach in this case, but Los Angeles, um, and with a message about the earthquake. And the message here is from Hollywood. The pupils will not be returning to this school for some time, so they will have a holiday they were not expecting. About 29 schools here badly damaged in this earthquake. From Alfred to Miss, can't read that off the screen. So I got to remember the Fields Act, whoops, with the response to the damaged schools, and this shows and mentions one of those specific schools. Um, During this period, there were also lots of postcard booklets that seemed to be either sent or collected by people. And so this is just one of several that I have about the Long Beach earthquake. Again, nothing to do with the Constitution itself, but this particular booklet, I'm showing the front and the back of it. And so the mailing information is on the front. This is postmarked March 27th, 1933, sent to Indiana, again from Los Angeles. And we have the return address, the sender marked here very nicely. And then on the other side of the booklet, space for a message. And this message reads, Dawn, which, well, I don't know if that means a person named Dawn or he saw this at dawn. But dawn yesterday, I saw the ruins. The streets are all cleared by now. These pictures are all of Long Beach, but there was more complete demolishment in Compton, etc., only not such a large town. So there's another image I'm not showing, but there was an X on that image. And he says the X on the next page is the quake that knocked the dresser into me. So there seems to be a little more story there. This booklet had 8 pages and a total of 28 photos. So here's one page showing 2 photos, and the bottom photo is the what happened to the post office. It says the U.S. Post Office carries on in the street. So I guess they had a little time that first day getting going, but before long, they seemed to be back in business as best they could. And I actually think that's my last image. Let's see, yeah. So I guess that's it. And I'd be happy to try to answer your questions. I'd be happy to receive any feedback.